First and foremost, I do apologize for the noise. It's another one of those extremely hot days, and it's also rather humid on top of that, so kind of having to deal with that. I do apologize. Now, for those of you who may or may not remember after the gargantuan worldview video I just did, when we last left our party, they had just helped out the town of Kinth and had moved back to Al-Farat in order to basically get ready for their next stop. They spent some time there, and to their great surprise, did not actually hear any news of the war breaking out, or any secret attacks, or anything, despite the fact that they had actually seen airships moving in the night, just 2 nights previous, I think. No, 3 nights previous at this point, because it takes a little while to cross the desert. They decided their next best move would be served by going to the guild and seeing if there were any new bills. Now, there was one existing bill, which they already knew about. That was the one to deal with the Golem. At the time, I don't think the players fully understood what exactly a threat a Golem represented. And to be honest, I kind of did that on purpose, because I didn't want them to think that it was out of their league, basically. But, and then ironically enough, once they got to the next town, I actually did tell them exactly what was up with the Golem. But anyways, the other one wasn't really a bill per se, so much as a call to arms. You see, someone had decided to set up this place called Danpes, which is a arena city. They put gladiatorial games on display. Now, this place is fairly new, all things considered. Whoa, excuse me. It's fairly new, all things considered. Only about a year old at this point. However, it's basically the first thing of its type within this setting, that type of competitive gladiatorial combat. There are some pretty specific rules regarding it. The fights are not to the death. The amount of pay you get is solely dependent on how well you do and how long you fight. Many people just fight, one time through for one tournament. However, there are also many people who basically live there at the city that has grown up around this Colosseum. And these people are career fighters. They re-enter the tournaments fairly regularly. There's usually a tournament every few months, and there's one that's about to be starting. As you might imagine, quite a few of the party members were very interested in this tournament thing. I just feel like pointing out something, kind of breaking the fourth wall here for just a moment. Many of my players, well, that's actually a total lie, a couple of my players had voiced the opinion that it felt like their decisions hadn't really changed anything, that they were on rails. This is probably my favorite example of how they were not on rails, because the way the story could have gone based on this one choice, let's just say it branched significantly based on whether or not they decided to go to Alarin or to the tournament, because unlike the previous circumstance, these two were mutually exclusive. Whichever one they chose, it would completely change the overall path of where they were going. Now, of course, I didn't have everything planned out, but you get the general concept of what I'm trying to get across here. The party was actually rather torn on the two, but after a while they decided, okay, let's get some more information. The bill to go to Al-Farin, that's the city name, to deal with the Golem, was being posted by the Order of Summoners. And if you were paying attention to my World video, which I don't blame you if you weren't, they're basically the charity, helpful, awesome organization that basically everybody has a reason to trust. And the idea of helping the Order of Summoners with a problem with a rogue Golem appealed to several of the party members more than going and fighting, and bloodshed for money, basically. It is also worth noting that Al-Farin was quite close to the Spatial Temple, and several people were very interested in that as a concept as well. The end result, as you might imagine, was they decided to go to Al-Farin and deal with the Golem issue. Now, once they got there, well, actually, I want to take a moment to describe something, if I may, because I really liked the segue, I guess. That's probably the best way to put it. You see, on their way to Al-Farin, the roads, and I gotta use quote-unquote here, through the desert, are actually basically just massive signposts that help indicate, go this way, right? You know how it is. And as they were going along, they found what I like to call a sort of a resting stop kind of a situation, right? And the whole thing was pure role-playing. There was no real purpose for it. But this is I added this basically because this is kind of the way the Nevere work for the most part. If you've been paying attention at all, I know I kind of skipped over the Nevere in detail during my video, which is my own fault and my own stupidity. But basically, they exist, even within their Confederacy format, they exist pretty much on trade. So I'm just going to share a couple of posts I actually did here with regards to this little camp. Like, as the morning hit, as light slowly begins to enter the camp, you become aware of an incredible smell. Several troops, in uniform but neither armed nor armored, are roasting something over an open pit at the center of the camp. You recall someone mentioning that the food was free, first come, first serve, to those who sought it. From here it smells like some kind of boar, with honey and figs, pears, and apricots being glazed and cooked into the meat, and there is a small area near the fire pit with tables and chairs, and 2 decently sized bowls of salad and fruit, which are being prepared as well. My sister, who was playing the Olthoi, really liked this, and my favorite part is she decided to go to the chef who was actually cooking this meal, or in charge of cooking this meal, and specifically get the recipe from them, because one of the things she collects is recipes for new food types. I mentioned that earlier. Rory, I like this too. Rory is the human barbarian, if you don't recall. He went to one of the soldiers. Damn it, excuse me, I'm very tired. I'm sorry. He went to one of the soldiers and was basically, you know, is there any good hunting area around here? And he looks at you for a moment very strangely, and he says, well, okay, if you want. There's boar, pheasant, and some wild herbs about 3 miles west of here. It's a bit of a trip, but we don't mind making it every day. After all, why bother eating rations when you can eat real food? The soldier himself gets a plate and goes ahead and sits there. Now, in case you're not getting the point across, obviously this is flavor, and I love doing flavor, and I wish I could do it more. I feel like I've failed lately because, you know, tired and injured and everything else. But net resultant here, I was trying to get across the idea that the Nevere, well, in this case, the state government, because, you know, Confederacy, supports the idea of basically funding these outposts, which have soldiers to defend them, which have, you know, cooks and supplies, and is regularly kept rations, so that, and they're all along the main trade roads. In fact, this actually specific road is called the Gold Road, which pretty much goes up north and south across about half of the entire Confederacy and leads directly to Iraq, which is the capital of Nevere. So the idea of supporting trade by making sure these things are here so any given merchant or caravan doesn't have a harsh journey on the journey, you get where I'm going with this, right? The comfort is actually important to these people, not luxury. And I want to stress that because there is a difference. This is not about being, you know, living on the life of luxury on the road. No, this is just about trying to bring more comfort to the many, many traders and many cargo haulers that go along, you know, the trade routes across the country. So anyways, sorry, little segue there, but I really wanted to go into that. The next day, they do end up in Alarin. Actually, the next day, I'm sorry, it took them 3 days' journey. My bad. Anyways, they finally end up in Alarin. Now, Alarin is a city I describe very specifically. It is a city that has no natural water resources nearby, and basically there's nothing nearby food-wise either. They can't grow food unless they use excessive magical uses, which they don't. And there's no edible animals nearby either. The only way this city exists is by continuously importing fairly large quantities of food and water. Now the city, I shouldn't even call it a city, this is more like a town, because it does not have that big of a population, as you might imagine. You're probably asking, why does this place even exist? This is one of the richer towns within the region, because there's just so much of a wealth of mineral and gem and other resources of the earth, so to speak, nearby. And Alarin is basically like right in the absolute middle of this massive nexus of veins and mines, and you get the general idea here. So there is a huge amount of money that is flowing through the town here. Now, I actually set up a great... Whenever the players go to a new area, I always sit down and make sure to fill in some of the details. I always have a generic idea of where they're going and what's there. But I always sit down and say, okay, who's the local leaders, who's the local military, what's the local situation, and I always throw in a couple of little miniature plot threads, or I shouldn't even call them plot threads, it's more like, what is happening in this town? In this case, I'm not actually going to tell you, because the players never found out, but let's just say there was some political intrigue going on here, based on the leader of Alarin, the mayor. But regardless, they get there, and they're like, okay, let's figure out this bill. Now, the very first thing that happens is they go to the order and say, we want to know everything about the Golem. And the order says, it's over there, and this is the situation. The players got pretty pissed off about this. At least some of them did. I feel like a couple of the players, I'm not going to name any names, didn't quite get the point that the entire idea here was that the order was trying to, how do I put this, boost the Adventurers Guild, which, as I've mentioned before, has been dying, by putting out this bill rather than dealing with it themselves. So they say, here's, I don't actually have any additional information that I can actually give you for this, because they didn't. It's just, the facility is out there, it's a water golem, and it's feral right now. I mentioned how golems can go feral back in the other video. For those of you who didn't watch it, in summary, a feral golem will attack anything and everything nearby, but will not roam past a certain area. And it's something that just kind of happens. Nobody's actually 100% sure how or why. But what it is the Order had purchased one of the abandoned mines within the region to use as a golem manufactory, and had been... I mean, so much money flows through this area anyways, it seemed like a good idea, especially given the trade route, because this city literally sits on the Gold Road. So they finally get together and they're like, okay, maybe we can get some more information from the Miners Guild. No, they didn't get any more information from the Miners Guild. Second, they really didn't. They kept trying to get more information and they kept failing. The only thing they ended up finding out... This wasn't me trying to stonewall them, by the way. There was no more information to be had. But the final thing they did find out is that the previous adventurers, because there had been another adventuring group that took up this bill a couple days previous while they were busy in Kainth, hasn't been heard from ever since they went to the mine. So they're like, okay, fine, whatever. We'll just go there completely blind. They even actually bothered to get a map of the mine. But I stress the map of the mine, not a map of the manufactory, so after a while, the player who got that actually asked me outright, is this map worthless? And I was just like, you know what, yeah, your character is probably aware of the fact that that map is completely worthless. It'll give you an idea of where it is, but that's about it. So, the players go ahead and head out, and they find the manufactory, and unlike most mines, because again, this was built into a mine, there are these huge, I'd say 50-foot tall steel doors that are intended to seal the place off. It's actually open right now. Now, as they approach it, the players are very, very cautious. This is actually really cool. They start looking around. Okay, any traps, any tracks, anything. They find out that there are several tracks. Oh my God! Excuse me. Ugh! They find several tracks of people who had recently entered and who had, from some time ago, left. Nothing else really particularly indicative. So, okay, they don't find any traps, no real worry. They go into the main room and they find 3 doors leading out. All 3 of the doors are currently closed, and there's what looks like a little receptionist desk, obviously currently empty, and some notes which don't have anything important. It's just, these people came, this person came, that kind of thing. The door to the north is this very strange door that is basically morphically sealed. It's the very first time the party has encountered a soul door, which is what I like to call it. It is a sealant which has been put on something to make it so that, which has been put on a particular door, portal, bag, whatever, something that can be closed, that thus can only be opened by someone of that soul, or of the souls that are tied to it, or of someone who is significantly powerful enough to overpower it, or someone who is significantly powerful and knowledgeable enough in weaving to unweave it. I only mentioned the latter two for the sake of completion. Obviously, the latter two are very much the exceptions. In general, a soul door is going to stay sealed until the person it's tied to opens it. So they figure that out, and they're like, okay, can't go that way, because the party does not have the ability to do the other two things. They try the middle door. Now, the middle door is trapped. They do find the trap, and I let Zeiss blow some AP in order to avoid the trap, as this massive column of fire erupts right where it was. There's a few seconds pause, and then Zeiss, or maybe it was Snarg, one of the two, successfully hears this really small click. And they realize it is a resetting trap, a resetting magical trap. I think this is the point at which Zeiss tried to convince Higaid again to go try it out. I could be wrong. He might have been joking about that in chat. I apologize. But either way, I said, yawn! Either way, they after a bit of searching and trying to figure out a way around that trap, they fail, basically. The rolls did not go in their favor. And so they finally decide, okay, let's try the south door. They open the south door, and the room beyond is very well lit, even though there are no lights. After a little bit of looking around, they realize what's going on. Now, the south door leads into a hallway. Well, this hallway is quite large, mind you. I'd say at least 30 feet tall, about 40 feet wide, give or take. Hang on just a second, I have a question I have to answer here. So, there are these aqueducts, for lack of a better term, these trenches lining the left and either side of the hallway, going all the way down the length of it and around the corner towards the end. Each of these trenches, or I should say both of these trenches, have this water in it that's just kind of laying there. The water is actually what's giving off the light that is lighting the hallway. As they enter, they encounter this little water globule thing, completely shapeless for all intents and purposes. It's just a blob of water, about human size overall. Just kind of starts tumbling its way down the corridor after them, very clearly hostile. So they managed to take that out. Actually, I have to give credit. Sethos, the white mage, he decides to attack it with his staff and gets a crit. Now, I have this rule, I don't remember if I've described this before, where if you get a crit, you have to describe the crit. Like aesthetically speaking, what happens. So Sethos decides that he winds back with his staff and actually hits it like a baseball bat, which knocks it into the wall and disintegrates it. The water falls to the ground, now just completely inert water, and the light in the room, in the hallway, dims significantly. And they're like, okay, so they pull out a couple torches and they keep going. And they explore for a little bit. They encounter a few more water globules in a similar manner, and each time they destroy one and it reverts to simply water, the lighting gets less and less and less, to the point where they're basically walking around in pitch darkness, and not counting the torches they have, obviously. They reach a point where there is a door leading, what is at this point, east, because they've been going around corners, and one to the south. Now they open to the one to the south, and they encounter one last globule, take it out, no big problems, keep going, and they find 3 corpses in the room that's beyond that. 2 of them look like they are banderlings, or were banderlings. I really got to put that right properly. They are wearing completely ordinary gear, and when I say gear, I shouldn't even use that. They're wearing clothing. They're just people, civilians of some kind, right? They also find a Lugian who was wearing gear that has been rather smashed, all things considered. And it looks like there was a blood trail. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. There was a blood trail leading this way, and it was the Lugians. He had been bleeding the whole way down this hallway towards this room, and managed to stop here and died of his wounds, near as they can tell. They do a little examination. They find there's a very strange magical residue on all 3 of the corpses. They can't really figure out what it is. So they're like, okay, this is very strange, but it looks like we found at least one of our previous adventurers. So they go ahead and say, alright, let's try the final door. So they open the final door, and there's this really large room, which is dominated by a staircase of yawns. Damn it. There's a very large staircase that basically covers the entire width of the room. There's no point at which you can go across this room without going down this staircase. There are several stations, workstations, that kind of a thing, magical Imperial tablets, that kind of a thing, all of which line the walls and have their own stations popping up here and there. General work facility area, and there is a huge, extremely sturdy-looking steel door. And when I say door, it would be better to say gate. Anybody of you know how a garage opens upwards? I forget what that type of door is called, but that's what we're talking about. It's not, a door that opens up, or out, I should say. It's a door that will slide up, that kind of a thing. It looks very sturdy, to say the least, and very well reinforced. There's also a magical reinforcement on top of that. There is a panel right next to it, which will allow the door to open. Now the whole party's like, oh god, okay, the golem is right past this thing. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. And they get it set up so like everybody in the entire group except the one person who's actually gonna be opening the door is like at the top of the stairs on the other side of the room, ready to run. While the one guy is like also ready to run. He actually his action was he activates the door and then turns and runs. So they activate the door, and the door, I want to stress this, it slides up, right, in order to open. But when I say slides, you're probably picturing, no, this thing opens up so fast that it's very startling. Like we're talking about within about I don't know, at least a tenth of a second. Very, very quickly. Shunk! Just like that. This massive 40-foot tall door. Funk! Just like that. And everyone's like, holy crap! And they look into the room beyond, and it is a moderately well-lit, large room. And that's basically all they could see there. When I say moderately well-lit, I mean it's fairly dark, all things considered. And of course, they have their torches with them, so they can't really see much. And there's a decent pause as they're just staring at this door into this massive empty room, just like, I'm not sure I want to go in there. I'm really not sure I want to go in there. Can we not go in there? And they actually debate it for a while until finally they decide, okay, look, we can go in there or we can leave and give up. Because this is the last place they'd explored. I kind of skipped over some exploration. So they're like, okay. Everyone moves together as one. Into the room. No, that's a lie. Everyone moves into the room except for two people. And they start looking around in the room. I forgot about that. They start examining the room. Okay, now there are those aqueducts, those trenches, also line this room on on the south and north sides, which is to the left and the right of the party as you're entering. These are much larger trenches, and there's a fairly large amount of water in them, but they're not actually lit up like the other water was. They also discover what I'm only going to... You know what, I should pull up my own notes on this because I really want to get across the description here, if you'll give me just a moment. Hang on. No, not yet. Hang on, here we go. So there's when they covers the Lugian. This is where the door opens. Give me just a moment. There are markings along one of the wall. That's what I describe it. And they're like, okay, well, let's go. Oh, and by the way, the room smells really bad. So they're like, okay, what the hell? You can and one of them is, wonderful, you found a sty. And so they go over and examine the markings on the wall. And as they get closer, they realize that they are not markings. It would be more accurate to call them smearings. Whatever it used to be, it isn't anymore. It has been smashed and smeared so thinly and so finely against the wall that it is little more than a very unpleasant paint. Zeiss had the best reaction to that, which is basically, is that what I think it is? And I'll go ahead and tell you, for those of you who haven't already figured it out, that's the other adventurers that came here previously. Or rather, the organic paste of what is left of the other adventurers. About this point, Sethos and Kezrintka, who were outside, failed a couple of rolls, and this giant wave of water swept both of them into the room, all out of nowhere. The very moment they are inside the room, that massive gate I mentioned slams shut just as suddenly as before. Just BAM! Right down. And as you might imagine, that's when the party rolled for initiative. I was really pleased with this boss fight because I really think I got across the point of what this thing was very accurately. It was a huge water golem. Much, much larger than a golem should be. All the water in the room and all the water that swept into it, focused into it, and when it actually moved together into this massive maelstrom of a vaguely not even quite humanoid shape, just this massive thing standing there, it lets this horrifying roar, which actually shakes the entire room. Now, the golem fight, unfortunately, I'm not going to describe in complete detail for you, for the same reason I don't describe any of the fights in detail, so I'm just going to cover a couple of things. The golem kept creating additional globules, just like the ones from earlier, and sending them after people. It also hit like a truck, and every single one of its hits also had a knockback component, if you understand what I mean. All of that could be resisted, of course, but it tended to send several of the party members flying at several points in time. It managed to really beat the crud out of the party, and they were doing pretty good about keeping the globules under check. Each time they destroyed a globule, the room got a little bit dimmer and a little bit dimmer. The golem, however, did not shrink, and I made a point of that just to get across a point, which I'm not sure they ever actually caught, but whatever. It reached the point where they finally started exposing the core, the heart of the golem. By the way, small fact that I've kind of skipped over because it wasn't actually that important, but forgive me. The bounty for taking out the golem was significant. There was a bonus bounty for successfully returning the heart of the golem, which I've discussed before, intact. Now, the party had every intention of trying to return the heart of the golem intact, because, you know, money, money. At about the time at which the heart started being exposed, I'm pretty sure at least 2 people were in down status already. Most of the mages were completely out of mana, and it had just hit its frenzy, its enrage timer. Or, not in timer, I'm sorry, I don't know why I call it that. Old habit. It's enrage. And the golem reached out both of its massive arms, solidified them significantly, and started spinning around. Put its very first volley of this whirlwind attack, put an additional 5 people into down. The only person who actually survived this, if I'm not mistaken, was Guido. Now, it's at about this point that Hanuel, who plays a green mage, finally decided to unleash his desperation maneuver. For those of you who aren't familiar with how this works, and that's probably all of you because I haven't really talked about it in my classes yet, green mages, their summons, have a desperation maneuver. All of them do. That desperation is stronger based on the level of the aspect. And the aspect is their summoned creature, by the way. And it can only be used once per week. And the moment they use it, that's when the timer starts. It's not like, you could use one Sunday and then you could use one Monday. No. 1 week cooldown period in order to use a desperation. So you really want to save them. But, as you might imagine, they're all pretty strong. Hanuel happened to have a spatial aspect, and that means its desperation was to shoot the living hell out of this thing with several dozen shots of magic damage every round. Now, this was an extremely good move on Hanuel's part, because this basically saved the party. The raw damage output that Hanuel started doing was insane, something along the lines of 90 damage a round, I do believe. And it's unavoidable, basically, for all intents and purposes. So yeah, that worked out really well for the party's sake. And the golem finally just groaned and shook, and then all the water splashed down to the ground, getting everybody completely soaked. Pretty much, so there was enough water there that it actually made the entire room have a standing water puddle of an inch or so. And the heart was, of course, completely destroyed in the process, but, whatever, they lived. So they spend the next couple of rounds trying to recover from this monstrous boss fight. Probably one of my favorite boss fights they've encountered so far, actually. A couple of the more observant party members noticed something. It's really slight, but basically, the water started drifting in one direction, towards the east, right? The far wall. And as it drifted, they began to realize that how do I put this? The room was slanted. That's why the water was drifting. There was just a little bit of a tilt. So it's like, the water was basically running downhill, right? Now, here's the interesting part. When it got to the end, it kept going. As in, instead of pooling, it was vanishing somehow. And as they examined it, they discovered that there was this very, very, very light crack along part of the wall. In other words, the water was escaping into it. Naturally, the party was very curious about this, and after making sure they at least healed everyone up from down status and made sure that everyone was alive and capable of walking. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because one of the people who went downed was Sethos. That'll become relevant in just a moment. They found the hidden trigger, a very well hidden trigger, by the way. They rolled extremely well to find this, and hit it, and part of the wall magically opened up, unsealed, basically. The moment it did, all the water, of course, went rushing through, and there was the staircase leading down quite a ways into a completely different facility adjacent to the Golem main manufactory center. At the bottom of this place, they found a relatively small room, all things considered. I'd say about the size of a house, give or take. A normal-sized house. It had dozens of panels and very, very unusual pieces of equipment lining it on all sides. The kind of stuff that, honestly, I can't even describe to you properly. Oh, excuse me. It was... I kind of failed for words when I was describing it then, too. Just picture, there's your standard mad scientist type workshop, as much as I hate to say that because that's not actually accurate in this case, but whatever. And there were a couple of adjacent rooms, which several people decided to check out. And they found several things, including one of the orders, well, I shouldn't say the orders. There's this type of metal slate that you can enchant to basically be a thing to read and write upon. They tend to use that instead of paper for large-scale things, and they found one of those and specifically decided not to take it and not to read it. Very, very interesting choice on that. I'm kind of skipping over the important part because I wanted to describe the room and its adjacent rooms first. They found nothing of any real worth other than this slate and the equipment, which they couldn't even understand what it was. Even with some very good knowledge, engineering rolls and magical rolls, they look at this stuff like this is the best they could determine was that this stuff was this was magitech, and it was past them. It was beyond their understanding. The very center of this room was this massive crystal, just kind of floating there, green crystal, right? This green crystal was completely non-see-through. You couldn't even look onto it. It was so reflective, actually, that it was like a mirror. If you were looking at it, you could actually see your reflection perfectly on it. They tried several experiments with it. The party did. First of all, they tried to, for example, throw some fire onto it, literally like lighting a match and tossing it onto it. They also tried throwing some water on it from what was the golem. Several other things like that. The crystal absorbed everything. They tried to scan it. The crystal absorbed the spell. Now, for various reasons we're not going to go into, Kezrinthka reached out one of her clawed hands to go ahead and touch it, to try and see what it felt like. The moment she did, she got a will save, which she failed, and I kind of figured she would. What immediately follows was Kezrinthka screaming about everything around it, and just going berserk and immediately attacking several of the party members. Very first thing she did, I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, was attacked Sethos, the white mage who was at like 2 HP at this point, and immediately sent him right back down to 0, sent him back into down status, so he's right back down on the ground. Went after Rory and started snipping at his ears, insisting that Rory was this freak creature for not being an elf and its non-pointy ears. And then went back after the, let's see, I believe that would be Guido and Snarg, who were both coming after her, basically full force. They were attacking to kill. Do keep in mind Kezrinthka was also damaged after the Golem fight. Now, this is important, so I'm going to describe this to you in full, okay? As it was conspiring, after her last action of, going after Rory, going after Sethos, and I think like 2 other people, this happened for a little bit. Snarg came after her full bore, full tilt, with weapons ready, and at that moment, whatever was wrong with her stopped, and Kezrinthka was Kezrinthka again. So, from Kezrinthka's point of view, she touches the crystal, and the very next thing she sees is Snarg bearing down on her with a weapon, which hits her sufficiently hard that it actually sends her unconscious into down status. I don't know if I've described the Olthoi in sufficient enough detail, but that will be important later. That's the kind of thing that would probably affect a human pretty badly to immediately have that kind of experience happen to him. But an Olthoi? And of course, the next thing that happens, and I feel like adding this, is Rory decided to literally kick her while she was down, which might have actually caused her to have further injuries. And Guido and Higaid both actually attacked Rory, non-lethally, obviously, in order to basically tell him, back the hell off. So, at this point, Snarg, the gnoll, is like, okay, we're getting the hell out of here. And picks up Kizrinthka, I believe, and Sethos, both of whom are in down status, and starts dragging them out, saying, "Are you coming?" And they toss out what little healing they have to try and get both of them up to the ability where they can walk, and get the hell out of Dodge. Excuse me, you're on attack. Now I want to keep talking for at least a little bit, because I'm not quite done with this particular adventure yet. They get back to town and they report what's going on, and of course, as per usual, there has to be some proof, there has to be examination, so they will get paid when they're done. So they spend some of their time recouping. They get at several places at the inn. All those people who had major injuries because of the many people who were demolished by the fight and then by the second not quite fight, all are like, okay, we need to go to so they go to the local healers, get their bones mended. Ashikil, I remember, had some broken injuries as well, but he decided, because he's a troll, and one of their racial features is the ability to mend major injuries without needing healing, he decided to just go to his bed in the inn and just collapse after drinking himself into unconsciousness. Kazrinthka left town. Now, she went out to the edges of town and made this little camp, and just sat there kind of chittering nervously. I really want you to try and envision this, because do remember these are Olthoi. Very tall, terrifying-looking insect-looking creatures, right? In her particular case, she is a green carapace, because she is of worker brood. So she's sitting there, just kind of staring into space, chittering, and I actually had to ask my sister to retcon something, because I had a slightly different plan in mind for her character, and I asked, I didn't tell her. I was just like, could you please do this instead? Otherwise, she was actually going to leave the party at that point. And the reason why is the obvious one, because she was utterly traumatized by what was happening. People she had at least called allies and sort of friends had just turned on her out of nowhere and tried to kill her, and nearly succeeded. That kind of experience is horrifying for an Olthoi. And Guido and Tabrin both ended up going out and finding her, and trying to console her and comfort her, and try to get her to not freak out. Tabrin ended up failing because of the specific tactic he used to try and calm her down. Guido ended up succeeding, and so they managed, after significant effort, lots of role-playing, lots of character development. I love character development D&Ds. Forgive me for skipping over it, because I can't possibly do it justice, just reading it. But the two of them do successfully eventually manage to convince Kazrinthka not to leave the party yet, not to leave everything yet, and are like, look, here's the situation, we're here with you, we're here to protect you, we're on your side, please don't be freaked out, please don't be freaked out. Now, the next thing that happened was the next day came by, and they're like, okay, why haven't we been paid yet? Because the money was on hold. However, several of the party members had a bone to pick with the Order, so they go to the Order and they're like, alright, what the crap? And they encounter someone named Krilfu of Blackwater, that is a Moorsman. Now, they have no idea who this guy is, ironically. But he basically says he is really impressed with the way they dealt with the situation, and basically wants to offer them a job, okay? The party didn't take to that very well. Threw insults at him, yelled at him, and finally several of the slightly more diplomatic party members said, okay, give us some time to think about it. Unfortunately, that particular action, well, let's just say that there were some long-standing consequences of that particular event, but we'll get to that later. So they go, and what happens is the entire campaign kind of went on pause for about a week, I think, as the party debated in character, do we join the Order? Now, several people were very much enthused about this idea, and several of them were not, and all of it was for very good reasons. It was an excellent debate. I really enjoyed it. It came down to a vote, and the vote was very nearly split. The people who wanted to join the Order ended up winning the vote by, I believe, one person. it was an extremely tight vote, and I was really pleased with that. Excuse me. Because of how much I like tossing my players questions, dilemmas, situations that are not easy. It's not like, okay, do you want to kill this puppy, or do you want to give your candy to a starving child? You know, I prefer to send them things that require a little more thought than that, and I thought I succeeded in this case. So they decide, okay, we'll go ahead and join the order, but we want to know some information first. And they find out all sorts of information. And all sorts of little flavor things I'm just going to run by you really quick. For example, when you join the order, there is basically a soul contract put on you. This is a fully magical contract. It's not written or binding. But the long and the short of it is, well, I actually wrote out all the details of it for the players. Forgive me for not detailing it all. Long and the short of it is, if you do something, if you betray the order, if you try to attack the order from within, you will regret it, because the magical contract will basically have some literal, physical consequences to give to you as a result of that. Otherwise, you're good. The order can fire you at will, but they usually don't. And you're also obliged to follow orders, etc., etc. Within reason, you can question orders under certain circumstances, obviously. Like I said, I went into all sorts of detail about this. They also found out they wouldn't be joining the Order, per se, and this is the first time we really started talking about the organization of the Order, because the Order is divided into 3 wings: the first wing, the second wing, and the third wing. The first wing, if you'll forgive me for going into this briefly, is all about dealing with the magic, the green mages, the summoners, that is to say, the aspects, and the elements. The second wing is all about dealing with the finances, taking care of the people, accepting donations, healing, generally helping and taking care of people, and on top of that, they are also responsible for making sure history is properly recorded, archaeological and scientific endeavors, that kind of thing. You could call it the knowledge wing, and that would be a good way, but they also are pretty much the wing that deals with giving aid to people. The third wing is the military wing, Special Forces, and that would be the wing they were going to be joining, the third wing, as a special force group, the 113th branch of that particular group. They find out that Krilfu is actually the head of the entire third wing, the leader of the Order's military. He was here on coincidence, basically, and happened to hear about the situation with the Golem and decided that he would stick around for a bit, because he figured any adventurers who were capable of taking down a Golem were the kind of people he would want working for him. That was generally his mindset, right? Now, the party really didn't like Krilfu, and they really didn't like this whole situation, but the long story short is they went ahead and signed and joined up the Order, and he did have an assignment for them immediately, but several of the party members basically begged for the opportunity to go to the Spatial Temple first. Krilfu eventually allotted that. Each of the temples are very important to the overall culture, and if you'll forgive me, the quote-unquote spiritual side of the setting. I hate to use the word spiritual because that's actually inaccurate, but it's like, it's a deep emotional, mental, this is important to me kind of a thing. And many, many, many people make pilgrimages, to the temples in order to visit them, take in the sights, take in the thing. You get the general concept, right? So as you might imagine, there was actually a pilgrimage scheduled to be leaving from Alarin literally the next day, and they were desperately wanting to go with. So Krilfu went ahead and gave them leave. Okay, we'll put the assignment off briefly. I'll smooth things over with the people who want us to work on this, and I'll get into that much later. But we'll go ahead and let you go on this thing. So they go ahead and sleep the night, members of the Order, and the next day they end up encountering an abrexy. An abrexy is the term for what I consider to be the most common rank amongst the Order. The best way to describe an abrexy is it's someone who deals with other people. If you need counseling, if you need guidance, if you need comfort, if you need someone to just listen to you talk for a while, if you need someone to try and help you out financially, that kind of thing. That's what the abrexy do. They are by far the most populous member of the second wing. In any case, an abrexy is there, a big old ogre, who is going to be leading the pilgrimage down to the Spatial Temple. And the party basically moves full-time. They actually set up this rotation. They have several wagons set up. And some people will be traveling on foot, and helping the wagon and keep everything dry, and then they rotate out, and the other people who were sleeping in the wagon during that trip will then be walking, and that way they can make very good time because they're basically on a time crunch, or rather the party is on a time crunch, and the order has basically ordered the pilgrimage to hurry up so that the party can hurry up, if you follow me here. I'm going to stop here because I really want to cover the spatial temple in its own video, its own section. Only 44 minutes, wow. So I do hope you've enjoyed, despite my constant yawns. I've been very tired today, but I really, really wanted to get a video out, a proper video, not just a stream out. So I hope you enjoyed. And next time we will find out what happens at the spatial temple. Dun, dun, dun! I'll see you around, guys.